This building is the former library of Cardinal Mazarin in Paris. It's now part of the French National Library complex, and you're watching me draw it at double speed. This drawing took approximately 26 minutes in real time, so if you want to watch it in real time, you can use that cog icon to bring it down to half video speed, which will bring it back to real time. How to draw architecture quickly. It's a great skill to develop, particularly if we enjoy or would like to be able to enjoy doing location sketching, to sit in a street and to capture the feel of something that's happening around us. And often, if the architecture is not the subject, it's the backdrop, at least, to what we're trying to create in our drawing. And so a quick drawing style is really handy to have, and it's also a great way to develop a certain looseness and freedom in the way we think and draw as well. And that can be a very helpful thing to push deliberately into if we have a problem with getting tight and slowing down and becoming perfectionistic in an unhelpful way with our drawing, because we certainly get a much livelier feel with a freer, more gestural way of putting our marks on the paper. Now, you'll see where I started. I started with this front portico section. Where I start does depend on every drawing in a different way. But the principle is always the same, and that's where can I most accurately capture the proportion and the scale I want of my reference. How can I get the ratio of height to width as accurate as possible? What's the simplest shape, simplest, perhaps most box or rectangular type shape I can draw? Because once I've established that, I'm going to keep now using that as my measuring stick. So, for instance, with what I've drawn now, you can see that it becomes very easy to measure off horizontally. I don't need to work out that height. I can reference the frontmost part of the columns that we can see, and I can just adjust up or down according to how the part I'm now going left or right with aligns in the reference. So we take extra time, extra careful observation at the start, really concentrate on those height to width ratios and seek to capture them as accurately as possible, and then that lets us pick up a bit of speed elseways. Now, when we go upwards, such as in this case with the drum and the dome on top, then we need to go back into that more intense, more careful observation as well. Maybe make a few marks that we can use to work out exactly where we want to go. But it doesn't always work out as happily as we'd like to think, as I'll explain later in this drawing. And if you're finding this helpful and interesting, please hit the like button right now for me. That certainly helps me out as well. And I'm trying to work out exactly what I've drawn, and what I've drawn is an extra column. And so I'm just coming to realize that now. And so I don't worry too much though, because there are more lines I have to put here, and fortunately it's not a central point or a prominent point, and I'm assuming it won't be too noticeable, if at all, at the end. However, there's one inaccuracy that can't be said for, unfortunately, at the end, but I'll talk about that in a moment. When there's symmetry, I like to go across in both directions or all the directions, one after the other. That helps me to be more accurate. I don't need to draw the whole thing. If I'm doing a vertical line on both sides of what I've drawn, I'll do the vertical line on the left, then the vertical line on the right at the same time. It's a much more accurate way of lining things up with the tightness that we do come to expect in architectural drawing, even freehand drawing. And you can see me going from one side to the other. It also means that I draw lines in the same direction. The direction we draw the lines in and the order in which we draw them does make a difference to how they look. And so what I find personally works well is to do all the same lines all the way across in whatever it is we're doing. If it's a series of windows, do all the the vertical lines, then draw the horizontal lines. And that way everything not only lines up, but the lines look the same, which means that the overall windows, or whatever the architectural elements are, look the same. Now you'll see I aligned the sides of the drum with the colonnade, and that was fine. And I did a few lines to give me a guide, but for some reason I've taken my curve up to the top mark, which wasn't meant to be for that, instead of the lower mark. Probably something between the bottom two lower marks would have been more accurate. Now you might think, oh well, that line's just a little bit curvier, so what problem does that make? I mean, it's still curved, it still sort of looks right, and in some ways that's true, but I'll explain when I've drawn a little more of the drum exactly what the problem is and why I think it is actually an issue that we should give some note and consideration for. Now, with a building such as this, these neoclassical buildings, there's often a lot of decoration, and what I find works best is to not try and draw the detail of the decoration, but to capture the overall visual effect. When we, if you like, glance at the drawing, at the reference, what do we see? How does it look? How much detail do we see? What shapes stand out? Or are there certain directions of line movement that stand out? Is there a symmetrical pattern that's clearly symmetrical, even though we can't really see what it is? These are all considerations, because then we say, I don't want to draw that detail, but I want to visually capture the same effect in what I draw. So how can I do that? And for this example, you'll get to see what I do. So it's what I do in the pediment, in that triangular section above the porch, but it's also what I do on this back wall of the porch, or the portico area. So I'm looking to see what lines can we see. We can see this arch, this semicircle with a circular kind of shape roughly in it, with a little bit of decoration around it. So I do some marks that will create that. We have some flanking figures that sit atop of this arch, so I try and do marks that mirror each other in opposite directions. We see roughly a couple of circular shapes with some sort of perhaps wreathing around it, and a few carvings in the centre. So I try and just capture that general overall effect. And then we have some horizontal banding that's on the back wall as well, that is the same height from the ground but shifts slightly when sections of the wall that move back appear to drop slightly. And you'll see I've on the right hand side there, I've managed to join the two lines on each side of a column with the banding, instead of doing the banding between the two columns. Now, I'm sure I am not the only person to have done that, and I'm sure this won't be the last time I've done it. Perhaps this sort of error is more commonly made when we do all the vertical lines for windows first, and then we're joining them up, and we end up somehow joining the gap between two windows rather than drawing the two outer edges of the window. And so you can see that I'm using quite brisk line work here. And if you're finding this helpful, please hit the like button and help me out. That would be much appreciated. But one of the things in a quick drawing style is that we draw quickly. Now, one of the ways to draw more quickly is to draw on a smaller scale, which I think does work well for these location sketches. But the other thing that works well is brisk hand movements. Now, because we're drawing relatively small, our lines aren't going to be as long, and therefore, if we don't use our whole arm, it's not going to have such an impact, because we just have to keep the pen straight for a couple of inches maybe. And so I find a bit of what I think of as a flicking motion with my pen, a nice way to get a clean, crisp line that on a good day I can control adequately, whether it's a vertical, a horizontal, or an angled line. And I find that it creates an effect that has a bit of movement in it visually. It creates a certain aliveness to the overall feel of our drawing. It also makes very clear that we're not drawing a detailed architectural plan, or it's not some sort of drafting design, that it is a capture of a feel of the effect of the building, which then gives us a lot more freedom in the other marks that we use and we make. And you'll see me now going off to the right-hand side. You'll notice I often do the details right the way across, as I said earlier, and I did that here with the windows on the porch. And now we come to the dome. Again, I put a mark where I think the top of the dome is, and you'll notice that I don't actually draw out the whole dome. I do these ribs first. Now, again, notice that the ribs, they arch over the top of the dome, and so we don't see them join. And that's an important detail to notice. And then also notice with these next ribs that in fact they don't go as high. They pass out of sight even lower down than the ones that we've already drawn. And if we don't observe it, then we can't see it. But can you see the effect now of my dome with the drum being too curved at the top? The feel is that we're actually much closer to this building than we are in real life, and that we're looking up at the dome more and the drum more. And therefore, the angle is more full, it's more curved, because that's the way perspective works. The closer we are looking up at something, the fuller the curve is going to be. If we're further back, that curve is going to start to flatten more. And so what I've done is I've made the drum and the tower and the dome look larger in proportion to the rest of the building than they really are. Or I've also made it look like we're closer as well because of this extra curvature. And that's fine. We wouldn't know there's a problem if we weren't looking at the reference in this case. But sometimes when we make perspective errors such as this, or at least inaccuracies, it creates something that visually we just wouldn't see. And then we more seriously feel that something's wrong with the way the building looks, even if we can't pinpoint exactly what the perspective problem is. And some more effective details for the pediment and for the sculptures that are in it. I'm not trying to draw sculptures. I'm not trying to draw statues of people. I'm trying to just capture the feel of the overall forms that we see and the symmetry of the whole thing. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found this interesting. Developing a brisk, quick way of drawing architecture is tremendously helpful and useful, and I hope an encouragement to get out there and draw on location. You'll find this reference on my channel community page if you don't have the Mazarin library close by. But hey, whatever you draw, however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.